Ready to go?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome back to the Legend Fiction Show. I am so happy to be joined today by Jacqueline Lucca. Welcome back, Jacqueline. How are you?
Good. Thank you. It's good to be back.
Oh, likewise. And we're talking about a really fun topic today. Your podcast, Magic in the Ordinary. You very graciously invited me on it. Relatively recently. We just posted about it on our blog, and then I had you join us for our previous podcast, the Catholic Author Show, and so you have continued plugging away at conversations and interviews, and after hours, I thought, I want to introduce you to our community. So let's talk a little bit about Magic in the Ordinary. So what is it? Tell me about the podcast.
All right. Magic in the Ordinary. I guess it kind of started. I just wanted to start a conversation, and I was thinking a little bit about the magic in everyday life. That was kind of what inspired the name behind it. And just this idea that this world is filled with beauty and with wonder and truth and goodness, all of these things that kind of sometimes go deeper than what we can see. And I guess for me, sometimes it's kind of hard. Like sometimes it's easy to get caught up in the busyness of life, or caught up in work or seriousness, or the world, there's things that need to be changed. And for me, I wanted a space where I could just learn stuff and laugh and talk about real things and joy, just have a moment of wonder and rest, I guess, without having to be, too bogged down by anything. So that's kind of how it started. So
Okay.
the podcast is really just, I think it's a conversation. It's kind of, I like to think of it as a space for people who want to have that moment of wonder and rest. We talk about books, we talk about art, and then there's other things that slip in there as well. Let's see. I think it's a space for wonder is kind of what I think of it.
Yeah. What a lovely idea. Space for wonder. Why does wonder, why is that meaningful to you?
It's a good question. I think for me, wonder is so important because it's a way of slowing down. It's an attitude of gratitude, really, like this kind of sense of we have this world that has flowers and aurora borealis and all of these amazing magical things. And I think as a writer, especially as a fantasy writer, I get to play with these crazy elements that are either in fantasy worlds or in our own and kind of try to see them in a new way. And I think it's so important to preserve that sense of wonder, and not just preserve it, I think, but I think it's something you can develop. So it's something that you can kind of, take time to kind of sit with. So for me, it's important to sit with this attitude of looking up and seeing the beauty, I guess, looking up and really appreciating what's around me as well.
So what are some of the conversations that you've had? How long has the podcast been out now? Almost a year, I think, right?
I started it in January, actually. So
okay.
It's
A couple of months then.
So since the beginning of the year. And let's see, what episodes we have. I have a lot of episodes with writers. So I love, it's kind of honestly just an excuse to talk with amazing people and hear their thoughts. And I mean, that's so life-giving and fun. So some of the episodes include me talking with people about their latest book that came out, and the themes that are within that, and kind of digging a little deeper. I have a conversation with Mary Jessica Woods about Mark Maker, because her book on painting the truth, it hit me so hard. I thought it was really interesting. And so I wanted to invite her on and be like, what does it look like to paint the truth? And how can we explore and appreciate this side of life a little bit deeper, talking with the author. So those are some of the episodes I have on there. I love talking with people about their books or about other books that we just both mutually love. I have an episode on Hamlet where we just kind of geek out over all of the craziness.
Yep.
It's one heck of a book. It's a wild ride, right? But it's really fun.
So is it a show primarily to talk to writers about creativity and about books, or that's just kind of where it's starting? Where is it going? What are you hoping will happen with the podcast?
Ooh, that's a good question. I'm hoping, I think it is, a lot of my listeners are writers, because a lot of that's, or avid readers. So a lot of them are are coming to the show to hopefully get some inspiration or just kind of get a moment, to think about these different concepts. So in the future, I'm not, going to say it's only for writers for sure. Like that's, but I think there is a heavy emphasis on creativity. So kind of looking at how do we, how do we foster creativity and like, I don't know, I think that kind of comes with that appreciation of beauty element. So I think going forward, I'm looking for, I'm hoping to provide a show that has an element of, how do we enrich our own lives kind of, through beauty, maybe even spiritually, and then hopefully that will show up in our writing or in whatever creative medium that we kind of decide to go with.
Yeah. So why is it, like you mentioned, the aurora borealis, for example, in the world is so incredibly beautiful, but you've got this particular focus that you're really dialing in on, which is magic in the ordinary, not necessarily going out to Norway to find incredible things, but within the space that you are, finding the magic in that. Why does that move you? Why does that call to you? And why are you spending a podcast talking about that?
Good question. Yeah. So I think that there's a lot. I think that ordinary life is sometimes more crazy than people give it credit for, or more magical than people give it credit for, I guess. And so I think, like I'm trying to think, like the aurora borealis, for example, it happens way in Norway. You can go, you can travel there, you can have this surreal adventure. But it's actually really funny. The other day I got to see it kind of just right above my house, and it was really faint. I think if we wouldn't have stopped and kind of stared at it for a little while, I would have barely been able to tell it was there.
So where do you live?
I live in Minnesota. So
that's like kind of high up there. Okay.
Yeah. So for me, it's one of those things where, this is a very cold state. There's a lot of things I would change if I was in charge of the weather situation. But even in that that coldness and that, maybe dreariness sometimes of winter, there are those moments of looking up and being like, that is actually magical. And I think it's a really important kind of magic. Like, and I guess you could almost swap out the word magic for goodness or for beauty, I think. But I think this is partly inspired even by like the hobbits, where there's like there's a little folk, they live a simple life, but there's actually really powerful stuff that's going on there. And so, I think this idea that the ordinary is sometimes quite extraordinary is kind of a thread that I've seen throughout my own life of realizing like sometimes the craziest, most beautiful things that we'll see are really the things that are close to home, whether that is like a little dash of the northern lights up in the sky, or a book that we read that just kind of stuck with us forever. That those things that seem ordinary, but they have such a massive impact. But they've got such an enchanting presence, I guess, in our lives.
Yeah,
So.
I do like the use of the word magic. I mean, partly being a writer, but also there's a nuance of meaning there that's maybe you can sort of tease that out, because like you said, you could swap it out with goodness, but it's like, it doesn't actually mean the same thing to say like goodness in the ordinary, which might be true. But when you say magic, it seems like that magic is like goodness that can get into motion, or that can start doing something and more often than not surprise you.
Yes.
What do you think about that?
Yeah, part of the reason I like magic versus other things is because I think it captures a little bit of mystery in our minds. Like I think there's this sense of, when we say magic, there's something we don't fully understand about it, or there's something that's a little bit beyond us. If the fairy godmother is waving her wand, we don't fully understand how it works, and that's part of the beauty of it. There's something really good there that's happening, and we just can appreciate it. And there's something, very powerful that's going to transform our lives in a certain way. And I think that in the same kind of sense, sometimes I think there's beauty or there's goodness in our life that we could take for granted, but we could also look at it for what it is and recognize that we don't fully understand the depth behind it. Like we don't fully understand why our hearts are so completely captivated by, this story or this moment in nature. And, we don't fully understand it, or our head can't fully process, I think, like why this is so mysterious to us, why this is so transformative for us, how this hits our life in such a unique way. And so because of that, I think the word magic has these connotations of mystery. So looking at the goodness with the kind of attitude, with the disposition of not trying to be like, oh, yep, that's good. I like that. But just being like, wow, there's something here which I don't fully grasp, but
Yeah.
it is transforming my life. So
Beautiful. Well, so what was the moment that inspired you to get this podcast off the ground where you realized, okay, that's the name and this just needs to happen and I'm going to do it? Do you remember that moment?
yeah, so they actually happened kind of in reverse order. So I started the podcast. I was like, we need to just have conversations about good things in life, because I love listening to podcasts like that. Like, I'll put the LegendFiction podcast on while I'm making dinner, and I want to just hear conversations. Yeah, like, it's great. I wanted to just bring some of that to the world. I love those conversations. I love hearing and listening. So that's kind of how it started. Like, I was like, I know we need to just start conversations about some good things in life. And I know, I want to, I want to share about like some of these incredible things I'm learning about, which everyone seems to feel like is so ordinary, whether it's like painting, where everyone's like, yeah, let's just go paint a picture. And I'm like, no, there's something here that's really cool. There's something here that feels almost otherworldly, that feels magical. And I want to talk about this in a way that is a little bit maybe more, I'm not sure how to say it, more passionate, or more just from a slightly different angle, I guess, from what I was seeing. So I wanted to kind of bring, some ideas about life and about art and about books to a podcast. So I started the podcast, and I wasn't sure what to call it, but as I was, kind of looking at, as I was talking with more people and kind of sharing with things, that this kind of theme kept coming up of like, there is magic in the ordinary. The act of, writing a book is actually so powerful and so beyond what we can kind of understand. We're almost a part of something greater. The act of painting a picture, I've had a lot of discussions about how, the picture is like more than a sum of its parts. Like, you're just slapping acrylics on a canvas, but you're able to move people's hearts through that somehow. And so there's this common theme that I kept running into of, there's magic in the ordinary. And then it had to be called that. Yeah.
What I like about how you're tackling it is not we're trying to create or put magic in ordinary things. We're discovering that it's there and we've forgotten it or we've ignored it. And it takes a certain something to not bring it to life, but to sort of make it come out again. What would you say that something is?
Ooh. I mean, I think my first thought would be a childlike disposition. And I guess I would kind of, like, I think I would say, a different word for it might just be humility. And just, I think that's one thing that I've been learning this year on my journey as an artist and a writer. I think it's been humbling. So I've been like, and I've shared a lot of that on my podcast of like, I tried to paint this picture. It was not what I was intending to paint. And like, how am I going to deal with that? What's going to happen with that? And being like humble and kind of like, all right, what do I not know? What is kind of out there? What can I learn? And kind of coming with that attitude, shifting a little bit from, just to more of an arms open stance, I guess, is really important. And I feel like for me, it feels very childlike in terms of, re-seeing the world again. I think in what is it, Tolkien's On Fairy Stories, I say there was this quote he has where he says something along the lines of, we write rivers that flow with wine to remember for one marvelous second that rivers flow with water. And there's this sense of like renewed wonder. And I think that's the attitude we have to have, is like coming in and just seeing things anew for the first time, and kind of looking at things intently with the, not just to fully understand them or wrap our heads around them or anything like that, but just to let them be the amazing things that they are around us, and those little things in life all around us.
Yeah, for us to recognize that the thing itself is still wonderful, like it ever was, only we stop being aware of what it is and that it's still wonderful. We just kind of got, like, our awareness just kind of got dusty. So clearing that off again to re-see what the thing is. Yeah, oh, that's wonderful. So you host academy. You have your own academy, and you give online courses and workshops and so on. Did this podcast, these conversations, come out of all of the people that you're chatting with around that? And was it kind of made for them, and it's sort of grown since then?
Good question. It was, let me think. It wasn't intentionally for my students. Like, I didn't start with it thinking like, oh, my students need to know this. So it was more of, just me trying to process all these also, these things around me. But I think it probably, if not consciously, was very much influenced by a lot of the conversations we're having in these classes of, we're discussing a lot of literature and a lot of writing. And I think that I think those discussions really have impacted the way I see things. It's crazy to me that I can read a book that I've read, however many times, and I can discuss it with a 10-year-old and they can completely blow my mind. Like, and be, I'll be looking at this book wondering how I never saw this particular theme, or how I never thought of it from that one character's perspective. And so I think that probably has, even though that, I didn't start the podcast thinking intentionally of like, oh, my classes have helped me have all these new ideas. I think that's a good insight, in that I think they definitely did. Having those children's or that new perspective, even of just looking at things in a new way.
And for those who don't know too much about what it is you do, what is it that you do such that you're with all of these children and you're teaching these courses?
Yeah. So I started I guess it's an academy, it's an online platform called Adventures in Excellence. And the idea is, it's all online currently. We'll see what happens in the future. But it's online to provide high quality composition and literature courses. So there's some creative writing in there, but it's a lot of, academic composition and literature courses that I approach it from a kind of classical education standpoint, which has very much this idea that there's truth that we can pursue and that's worth pursuing. And there's goodness and beauty. And so because of that really impacts, the way we're going to write. I'm going to try to challenge them to write truthfully, to write beautifully, to write eloquently. And the same thing with the literature, there's kind of an extra depth to the classes. We're not just kind of dissecting books and poking them for, beautiful ideas, or, just kind of what symbolism we can take away from it. We're kind of trying to dig deeper into that. And what truths are we hitting here? How do these books transform us? What bearing do they have in our life? And I always, I tell people, like, we're trying not to just read a good story. We're trying to live a good story. And so, like, that's really.
Can you unpack that a little bit more? Because I grew up with a very classical education, variety of different homeschool programs and so on. And I've got a suspicion that, as wonderful as a lot of classical literature is, it's being done in an unhelpful way in a lot of places, where all young people, for example, are doing is reading classical literature and struggling to connect that with living their lives today. And they end up feeling so, well, in a way, like disembodied. It's kind of like a cultural dysphoria. Like, I don't feel like I should be in this. I'm supposed to be living back in the Pride and Prejudice era or Treasure Island period or something. Like, this is not my time. I'm out of joint. And I struggle with that. I mean, I used to feel like that totally myself too. But now I begin to I feel like every single one of us are supposed to be alive here because, hey, we are. Yes. And the stories in the classical literature that we celebrate and that we venerate, is kind of a loose word, they were crafted for specific times, but there are deep truths in them which are transtemporal, which exist beyond the moment because they speak to the human condition. And I think we miss that sometimes, and we can end up forming ourselves with cultural ideas that no longer apply to today. Right. I'm still trying to sort of forming this idea. And that's why some people can get hung up and unable to kind of deal with and engage with the modern world, because we're, in a way, you were raised like you lived 400 years ago, as opposed to what I'm kind of hearing, what you're doing, which is drawing out the honey from, what's happening in the story. Maybe you can make more sense of that than I can. How are you doing that?
Ooh, that's a really good question, actually, because I didn't even think about that flip side of, like, it can be dangerous kind of to disembody these. And I think, that's really good. I think that one of the big things I've always tried to do is immediately make sure that we're connecting this with their lives in, like, a very practical way. And that's something, at the beginning of every class, often when we're starting a new book, we have to talk about setting, like, where does the story take place? And I'll usually try to have them compare, and it depends on what age they are, to what depth this goes into. But we'll usually
average age that you're dealing with?
So I have 4th graders to 12th graders. I've got a series of
Okay.
classes.
Wow.
So, the high schoolers, I'm really pushing them. Like, some of the high schoolers, they're interested in like going to seminary after this. So I'm like pushing them, like, what are you, like, how is this going to change? Like, how can this story help give you a base for whatever theology classes you're taking next,
Mhm.
or, but some of my 4th graders, maybe this is just their first time reading a fantasy book, and I'm going to have to push them in a different way of what's different from our
Mhm.
world in this story that we're reading, but then
Mhm.
what commonalities do we see, and how is this book going to be able to connect to us? So that's,
Mhm.
one way is looking at the setting. But I think for me it's this constant question, in maybe not in every class, but I try as close as possible to really connect this of, but why do we care about this? So discussing themes of courage and being like, why would we care about this theme though? Like, how might this look differently in our own life? And I think so, staying grounded in terms of, how does this look similar to what I'm dealing with?
Mhm.
And then how can this have an impact on what I'm personally dealing with? And so, that might look really different. Like some of my students, in the 4th grade classes, maybe they'll come away with, I need to be a nicer sibling, that might be something like that, that little, or, they'll have an insight about like, oh, I really want to be braver, even if my friends are mean to me, because this character faced down a dragon. So like, I can be a little bit braver, so
Mhm.
this might be something like really simple, but just really beautiful still. And then in high school classes, we're tackling these books that hit on truths that they're dealing with, because at this point, they've had social interactions with their friends. And so when we read Jane Austen and we get Emma's really snarky comments and the way that she, like, befuddling her way through her love life and really
Yeah.
messing things up for her friends, we're trying to ground that in like, okay, so what are we learning from this? And so she, I've had students who hate Emma like viscerally, because they're like, I know that kind of person, I've seen her. And so we get to talk about, how does the book handle this, where do we go from here?
Mhm.
So trying to keep it grounded in terms of, understanding the text, trying to dig what's deeper in the text, and then why does this matter to us in particular? And like,
Mhm.
I will always say, like, every book that's ever written has some kind of statement about what it means to live a good life. Like,
Mhm.
um, whether, at the end of the day, like the courageous, prince wins and he's good, then it says something about courage. So every book has some kind of statement, implicitly or explicitly. What does it
Mhm.
mean to live a good life? And, really, a lot of my students, they're very religious. So like, there's a big question for them. Like, what does
Mhm.
it mean to live a good life? Like, this is something we're all trying to figure out. And
Yeah.
I think that one of my students has said that really he carries that with him now every time he reads the book of, what does this book say it means to live a good life? Do I agree with that, or do I
Wow.
disagree with
Intriguing.
that?
Yeah.
So
Because
yeah.
also where you are in your life and then who you are as a person,
Mhm.
that's going to change.
Yes.
Um, so to always be asking yourself that, what does this context demand of me? And then maybe like once you've mastered that kind of level, this is kind of the fun thing about life. It's like this ever evolving game. Once you've mastered this one thing, all of a sudden you realize, oh, I need to go work. Hopefully you're paying attention to yourself. I need to go work on this area over here now, because um, that's the whole point of life is growth, self-growth. What is a moment, maybe as we start to wrap up here,
Mhm.
that really struck you, that was a magic in the ordinary kind of moment? Like you mentioned seeing the aurora borealis recently.
Yeah.
Maybe is there another one that where you like just reduced you to just a state of wow and wonder?
Oh, that's a
And
good
that's not a fair
question.
question. I didn't prep you for that one.
Like, there's a million things. I mean, the Northern Lights thing was pretty crazy.
Mm.
That was pretty crazy. Um, we were driving and I was like, Mom, you gotta pull over the car. Like this is insane. So
Mhm.
that was quite crazy. But here's one other moment, and this is very, very ordinary,
Mhm.
but just the act of making myself a cup of tea, like
Mm.
that is very, very ordinary. But yeah, the other day, just heat up the hot water in the little tea kettle, and pour the water over a tea bag. And I think from a photographer standpoint, I'm always fascinated with this steam that kind of comes up in
See,
the
I
way.
didn't know you were a photographer. How cool. Sorry, keep going. That makes more sense now.
Okay. Yeah, like it's just this sense of like, oh, I've seen pictures where people like try to like color, like take 3 pictures and then try to color the different streams of steam, different colors. I haven't done that yet. But just kind of this moment of sitting there and listening to I like the sound of like the gurgling water in the cup. Like, I love that sound. I like have sound bites of just me pouring tea into cups. And then I have, just this like just watching the way the steam dances for a little bit and just breathing. I think that's like a magical moment of peace and calm and rejuvenation. Even without drinking the tea, there's a moment there that's powerful and beautiful just before the craziness of the day.
That's beautiful. It reminds me of how the Japanese go about their kind of their sacramental approach to tea making, and how for
Yes.
them that's the equivalent of our Eucharist, our communion. Like we enter into this because every single moment of this teaches us something about what it means to be alive, and the beauty and the reverence that they put into every step of creating tea for each other. What kind of tea do you like to drink?
So this is kind of funny. I don't know if you guys have seen throat coat tea,
No, I
but
haven't.
it's like, what's in it? It's like there's like root of marshmallow plant and
Okay.
like a couple different herbs, and it's a little bit sweet. And I have been drinking it on repeat at the end of the semester because I'm like, it works. It works. It tastes amazing and it makes your throat feel really nice. So that's my current go-to. So
Very cool. Very cool. How can people find you online if they want to check out your podcast? And we're going to wrap with a kind of cool announcement. So for now, where can people find you online if they want to hear your episodes?
awesome. Yeah, I think it is JacquelineRoseGold.podbean.com. So that is the official podcast website, but it is on iTunes or Apple Music, or no, sorry, Apple Podcasts. That's what it is. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, a variety of tinier little podcast platforms. Yeah. So any of those places are great to check out.
Nice. And I assume people can just Google Magic in the Ordinary and it'll also show up where they can search for that. Okay, fantastic. Well, since learning about you and following your journey and seeing you launch this podcast, I've just been loving the kinds of discussions that you've been having. And so I reached out and invited you to come and join our blog and start sharing your content, your episodes with our community. So whenever you're able to, moving forward, we're going to have Magic in the Ordinary as another series on the LegendFiction platform. So people sign up and they join the mailing list, and every week we have a digest of just posts and podcasts and academy events and all kinds of, like, a box of goodies just lands in your inbox once a week. And I'm excited to have Magic in the Ordinary be one of those.
Wonderful. I am so excited. Like I said, I've been listening to the LegendFiction podcast, and I've been a part of the community, and I love the people there. So getting to share a bit with them is very exciting. So.
Yeah. Last question. Favorite book that just has deep meaning to you in this sense of Magic in the Ordinary?
Okay. This is a good question. I would have to say Till We Have Faces. Ooh. And there's this line in there. The sweetest thing in all of my life has been the longing, like the searching to find the place where all the beauty comes from. And that line is kind of the deep foundation, the roots of the mountain beneath a lot of other things I do in my life. Of this, yes, there's beauty out there, and the search for it and the longing for it, that's some of the best parts of our life. So that's Till We Have Faces. It's such a good book, and I've been reading it on repeat for the last couple of years. And so that would have to be the book I list. So